From the past couple of weeks, the Jamaican economy are the hot topic. And it shows me say a lot of Jamaican people don't understand, don't have a clue how the economy work. And I understand that they weren't taught or they didn't have any interest to learn it. Them only feel the effect when the economy get bad and still not knowing say the economy a cause that. When them say food price go up and the money that them a get now have the same spending power. Them chuck it up to bad governance, but that is just part of it because it's bad governance of the economy. So on today's video, I have a young lady that is going to educate those people in a simple form of how important a good economy is, and also letting them know who was responsible for Jamaica downfall and Jamaica having a bad economy. Guys, I want to share this video with friends and family. Don't keep the information for yourself. It's kind of a lengthy watch, but I guarantee say the time I go pass because this is very informational. Guys, we're gonna get into that video right now.
So I thought a lot about whether or not to do this video. But I have decided that I have to. Don't know if it will make a difference, but I have to. An uninformed electorate is a poor democracy. Let me say that again. An uninformed electorate is a poor democracy. I have criticisms of both the PNP and JLP. In my opinion, the JLP has not done enough to explain on a micro level how the macroeconomics feed into that. There has not been a breaking down so that the average Jamaican can understand, so that my father, who has limited amount of education, can understand, so that the man who is a hustler and has never had to pay PAYE can understand. And then there is the PNP that has deliberately based a campaign in a way to keep the electorate uninformed and ignorant, because they know that an uninformed base is easier to mobilize. So I'm going to try and talk to you guys about why in the past I would have voted for PJ and Portia, and why I, one, regret that decision, but it was done. I was uninformed. And why it is now that I not only will be voting for Andrew, but I'm adamantly against my goal in ever getting reins for this country. Now, with that said, I believe everybody is entitled to their political opinion, and whether or not you vote in JLP or PNP, you ought to go out and vote once you are eligible to vote, because when you are a passive voter, what you do is allow others to make that decision for you. My hope is, even if at the end of this video you don't agree with my standpoint on who I'm going to vote for, that you feel informed enough to at least make a decision to go out and vote regardless of who you decide to vote for. So, under the last year of Manley's last term, 1990 to 1991, our dollar moved from $7 plus to over $11. That's a 80% or around about a 80% devaluation, right? Our dollar was worth 7 to 1 US and it worth almost 12 to 1 US, right? That would have significantly impacted the economy going forward, because in Jamaica, everything we do is hedge against the US currency. We rely on the US primarily for travel. We rely on the US at the time primarily for importation. We borrowed money from the US. Our banks would have held, a lot of their corresponding banks would have been in America. So when it is that your dollar is now worth 80% of what it used to have been worth, within just one financial year, it was economic suicide. So the PNP then comes into power. Guys, they're cutting the lawn, but I don't want to remake this video, so bear with me please if you're hearing the sound. Then comes PJ Patterson. And under PJ Patterson, what happened is that the dollar continued to slide by an average of 11% per year. 11% per year. For context, in the entire 9 years of the JLP being in power, the dollar has declined by 12%. The dollar was declining by 11% per year under PJ Patterson. It is also important to know that in the 1990s and early 2000s, the regional economy and the global economy would have been growing. Countries like Barbados, Trinidad, America, Canada was booming. They were investing in developments. They were making so much money. They were boosting their net reserves. The global context meant that it was prime time for Jamaica to have had a very stable economy. Everything that was happening in Jamaica was not reflective of what was happening on the world stage. It was all the fault of those who were leading the country. No global influence. Anyway, because of the mounting debt and the fact that our dollar wasn't worth anything, PJ Patterson and the government at the time, PNP, had to resort a lot to borrowing money. So by borrowing money, the government issues what is called a treasury bill. A treasury bill is basically the government borrowing money from us, and they would issue that treasury bill every 90 days. The treasury bill will come out and they will say, okay, the government will say, okay, we're borrowing $30 billion, just for example. And then the people would then bid and say, okay, I will lend you this amount of the 30 billion at 11%. The other man say at 12%, the other man say at 13%. Because these interest rates were high, everybody who had money started to compete, and so it was driving up the interest rates. So it translated eventually to the government initially borrowing money from Jamaicans, from people, and paying them back as high as 30-35%. Now, can you imagine? The government is not revenue generating. So when they're borrowing all of that money has to be paid back from taxes them collecting from people, and tariffs. Tariffs is what your people pay for import goods. So as a result, the government then, PJ Patterson, would have introduced the most amount of new taxes in the history of this country. Who pay tax? Jamaicans. So in essence, the government have borrowed money from Jamaicans to pay them back, but them pay them back with the same money where them collect from Jamaicans. That is essentially what was happening. So we ended up having a debt that was growing and growing and growing and growing and growing, and taxes upon taxes upon taxes. To the extent that in any given year, our debt was significantly higher than our ability to produce. What that means is that the government was broke, stock broke. So they could not meet any basic obligations. They couldn't out of pocket. They couldn't pay teachers. They couldn't pay policemen. So they had to resort to anyway. They couldn't pay policemen. They couldn't pay teachers. They couldn't finance the expansion of schools out of their own pocket. They couldn't refurbish hospitals out of their own pocket. They had money to do nothing. What does that mean? That they had to now borrow even more, right? So any little money they make, they pay back the loan them what them already take. But they never enough. So they have to even borrow more. So it created a cycle of borrowing, driving up interest rates, until they had absolutely no choice but to go to teachers, go to police officers and say, listen to me, we are begging if you have a heart. We are begging if you sacrifice for the sake of Jamaica. We're not going to raise no pay, and underneath you understand this is you sacrificing for Jamaica. And what I call out as hypocritical is, how are you then asking these people that you are responsible for to sacrifice after they have spent years sacrificing because of your poor mismanagement? So here we are now in a situation under the PJ-led administration that our debt burden is killing us. And we have gotten ourselves in such a bind that we have absolutely no choice but to borrow more. Right? So you borrow more, you borrow more, you borrow more. You don't have no choice. Right? Things still have to be done by government, but you have no money at all for do nothing else. So you're stuck in the cycle of borrowing. Now, I said I was going to share an analogy that I hope will better explain our situation. So this is the analogy. So what was happening is that PNP at the time was digging a well. And they were digging the well, and they were digging the well, and they were digging the well. And to their credit, they were focused on digging the well with the hopes of finding water that would benefit Jamaica. Right? Remember, this is just hypothetical. And so they're digging the well, and they're digging the well, and they're digging the well, but they now look up. And they're digging the well, and they dig the well, and the more they're digging and they're not finding water, they don't decide to move to a different spot and try dig a different well. Then continue to dig the same well. So them digging the well, them digging the well, them digging the well, them digging the well. And 30 years of digging this well before them look up. By the time they look up, it is so dark at the bottom, right? But by the time they look up and they see the sun shining, they realize, Kaka, we have digged this well so far down and we have absolutely no way to climb out of this well. So in walks the IMF. And the IMF then throws a rope down to the PNP. And they throw a rope down to the PNP, and the PNP started the process, at least of the discussion of climbing out of the well using the rope. And then the JLP now would have come in 2010 and finish up that process, help them to climb up, help them to pull the rope. Them up at top, Remember, they're not in the well yet, right? They're up at top and them pull up the rope using JDX, right? Jamaica Debt Exchange, National Debt Exchange, and one where nobody no want to talk about, which is called the Private Debt Exchange, but that's for a whole different conversation. And the PNP then comes out of the well. And instead of saying to the Jamaican people, we are sorry, we've spent so long digging this well, we had no water. What they said instead is that, give us credit for the rope. They come out of the well and they say, give us credit for the rope. Anyway, the Jamaican people decide that that was not sufficient of an argument. Apologize for what you do. You have ruined so many persons' lives. You have wasted so much time when our economy should have been advancing. And you come out and all you're going to say is applaud us for the rope. So in walks the JLP, and they decided to build a well in a new spot. And they took less than 30% of the time that the PNP took to dig that well to reach water. So they dug a different well in a different spot, and the water started to spring. And suddenly, it was quenching our economy. Now, whilst they were doing that, for context, right? Suddenly, our debt for the first time in decades upon decades was cut by 50%. What that means is that for the first time, the government now has money that they were able to finance projects out of pocket without mounting new debt. In the 9 years whilst doing this, it is important to note that it was one of the worst it was the worst global economic climate that has ever existed outside of the Great Depression. Right? So the global economy was doing horrible. Places, countries like Barbados defaulting on their debt, Trinidad having their rating fall to the dogs, America, Canada, England, everybody has suffer. And don't get me wrong, we are suffer too because of global market. But at this point, we were improving our economy when all other economies were not improving. So whereas under the PNP we were declining while global economy was looking up, in Jamaica we were improving while global economics was looking down. No, let me move away from that. So, in walks the JLP. Not only have they been successful in paying down debt, they have reduced assuming additional debt significantly. So remember, I gave an example of the treasury bill. They were issuing treasury bills way less often. They were borrowing way less money when they were issuing these treasury bills, and they were paying back loans at significantly reduced rate, right? Significantly reduced rates. And they were able to achieve this while increasing the income tax threshold by 157%. What that means, because sometimes we think that we hear say JLP are rich people. That is not true. What that means is that whereas you would get only 600,000 of your money without paying tax, suddenly you get 1.7 million before you have to even pay the first dollar worth of tax. In addition, they would have increased civil servant wages by the highest percentage that it has been increased in decades. The small business sector was wrecked in the 90s and early 2000s by FinSAC, and that is going to be part 3 when we talk to them about FinSAC. I explain it to you. Here it is a government that has now increased effective April 1st, and it was already increased previous to that. They have further increased the GCT tax threshold for small businesses to $10 million. That means a small farmer, that means any business where GCT would be applicable will not have to pay the government $1 worth of GCT until they have earned for their businesses over $10 million. I don't know if you don't understand what that means for fueling the small business sector. And I wouldn't even say small business. Honestly, in the context of the Jamaican economy, I would say small to medium enterprises. So all of this is now happening, right? They have also reduced the transfer tax significantly. That means it would require significantly less for you to access an NHT loan, thereby improving accessibility to home owning to more persons. Because interest rates are far less, significantly less, way less. PNP loan rates was over 300% higher at a commercial bank than it is now. It means that more people can access mortgages to purchase homes, to purchase vehicles, etc., etc. In now walks the PNP, and they are premising and campaign on the slogan "Time Come." And the narrative is that the Jamaican Labour Party has not done enough for poor people. I cry. That is stupidness. Me a Christian, so I can't say the word when me say, so I pray off. That is stupidness. The minimum wage increased by 157% benefit poor people. The income tax threshold benefits the lower middle class. But most importantly, with global economics and a reliance on importation that has existed in Jamaica for years and something affecting most third world countries, we are susceptible to the increase in goods on the international scale. Now, what is it that proper economic management means for that? It means that even though the price of flour, sugar and rice have moved from $100 per pound to $300 per pound, void of proper economic management, that same $100 per pound rice would have actually cost us $500 per pound. That is how macroeconomics benefit poor people. We now have the buffer within our budget to do a lot of economic easing, that despite increases that we have no control over, we are better able to control how it is that we pass on those increases or support poor people being able to afford these things. So prices have gone up significantly less than it has in our regional neighbors in Canada and America. You can do it. Research the price of any one of the most popular commodities in any of these countries in 2016 and now, and you will realize that those costs have increased by significantly more than our own costs have. That is proper economic management.
A people that forget the past are doomed to make the same mistake. Blueprint family, Jamaicans, election is a few days away. We need to make sure that we make the right decision. The decision that will allow Jamaica to grow, allow Jamaica to prosper, allow Jamaica to experience this prosperity. We cannot allow what happened to Jamaica back then to happen now. Our future generation will never forget. They will never forget and they will never forgive us. because the information is there. They are going to see that we had the chance to make this country great and we didn't. We chose die-heartedness and we chose propaganda instead of to make this country bloom in what we know it can become. They will never forgive us for that. So come election day, make the right choice and choose Jamaica.